I'm Cami Baker Clancy. I'm Director of Graduate Outreach and Admissions for the School of Graduate Studies at SUNY Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York. Thanks for joining us today in the first of our series of webinars that we're going to be offering, really kind of geared towards our theme this year, which is Sustain and Innovate. For those of you who are not NAGAP members, please consider joining our organization so you can continue to be involved in the voice of graduate enrollment management. And we really want to be able to continue to offer these types of programs in the future. So please check on NAGAP's website, which is www.nagap.org, to see the many benefits of being a member of NAGAP. And just a little aside, I've been a member since 1997, so that dates me a little bit. But I've really noticed how our organization has grown, and the types of professional development that we offer now for our members, I think, is really extensive, and helps me certainly in my day-to-day operations. So a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started with today's presentation. Do feel free to ask questions during the session. We have a chat box. You also have a question submission area. In the upper right-hand side of your computer screen, you're going to see a control panel. And in the lower portion of that panel, you can type in a question or a comment and submit it to the webinar organizers, which is Jeremiah, myself, and Christy Ross from our management team. You can do this at any time during the presentation, and I'll find the opportune moment to interrupt Jeremiah so we can answer your question. And we still are going to reserve probably about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So do know that even if you don't want to break in during the session, make a note of the question you want to ask so we can have that discussion later in the presentation. Today we have Jeremiah Nelson, who's going to discuss cultivating creativity and paving the road to innovation. Jeremiah is currently the Director of Enrollment Management for the Charlotte campus of Wake Forest University School of Business. And he has more than 15 years of experience in higher education. His responsibilities really kind of spanned a whole range of leadership roles in graduate enrollment management, including strategic recruitment, admissions, retention, career and professional development, diversity, inclusion, and student services. So really the gamut that covers graduate enrollment management. He's got more than 10 years of experience in teaching undergraduate courses in leadership, business ethics, and human resource management. And he holds a BS and MS from Central Connecticut State University, an MS in Human Resources from Western Carolina University, and this is a big one, he's currently pursuing his PhD in Leadership Studies at North Carolina A&T State University. And I get to work with Jeremiah a lot because I'm on the executive board with him, and he's currently serving as our NAGAP treasurer. So welcome, Jeremiah, and thank you for agreeing to present to us today.
Thank you, Cami, and thank you everybody who's taking the opportunity, and I'm sure a very busy season, to learn a little bit more about creativity and innovation. It's a passion of mine. It's the area I'm hoping to write my dissertation in, and excited to share a little bit with you today. So away we go. So just to get things started, I thought it would be helpful to take a pause and for each of us to just think a little bit about some of the complex circumstances that we're all dealing with in graduate education. Some or all of these may apply to you as you kind of think about where you're at or where you've come out of in the last several years. Lots of competition, more and more in the online sphere. The economy is getting better now, which is a good thing, but for many of our programs that results in a decline in enrollment, and so there's some kind of push and pull that comes along with that. International student demand being down is kind of a US focused thing right now for many schools. domestic demand, depending on the area and subject matter that you're working with. You may see that flat or down. Budgets, staffing, also challenging for many campuses. Corporate support for tuition reimbursement, for sponsoring university programs has been down over the last several years, although at least it's on the increase a little bit in terms of giving to universities. That's a nice change. Undergraduate enrollment, I guess the headline in the last couple of weeks was that only 34% of universities met their undergraduate enrollment goals. So for many of us in graduate education, that puts a lot of extra pressure on kind of what the expectations are for us in terms of delivering on our enrollment goals as well. For many campuses, there's a balancing act that's going on there. I've heard from a couple of colleagues who said they don't even know graduate exists until suddenly undergraduate enrollment is down and oh, we're their best friend. So, you know, we're all kind of trying to figure out in each of those situations how to manage the different expectations of our leadership, but also the expectations of prospective and current students, as well as our alumni, in how we serve them, in what we offer them, and how we do all that. So this is just a snapshot of some of the many challenges that we're all navigating as we move forward and think about what we can do. And so throughout all of those different contexts, what we keep hearing, and maybe you hear this if you're of a certain age, you hear more, more, more. How do you like me? How do you like me? We all hear this over and over again. Well, what's my enrollment goal? More. Well, the context is changing. Demand is changing. The program needs to be updated. More. I need more students. I need more students. I need more students. And in that kind of environment, it puts pressure on the whole graduate enrollment management context, right? It puts pressure on financial aid. It puts pressure on the scholarship process. It puts pressure on student services. Even facilities and classroom space becomes an issue as you're trying to fit more and more students into a program that was maybe designed or intended to be a certain size. So we're all trying to figure out that context as well. And so what are we going to do? There's a lot of pressure coming onto the graduate enrollment management team to figure out new and better solutions to the problems that we're facing. And basically, I pause here to say, for most of us, the tendency is to dig deeper and do more of the things that we've already done. The things that have worked in the past, the things that have worked for others, and that sometimes can yield the results that we need and get us through a tough pinch, but it may not be the long-term sustainable solution that we're looking for. It's going to take something more, and one way that you may approach the problem-solving process might be to get a little bit creative, to do things a little bit differently, to try some new things. And so hopefully this presentation offers you some opportunities to perhaps think a little bit about what you do and how you do it, and how you might maybe try some different things, particularly if you're in an opportunity of leadership where you can influence the environment and create a whole team of creative thinkers. That's a great opportunity to be able to leverage this collective kind of horsepower that you have at your disposal. So let's see what we think. So true or false, some people are creative and others are not. I'll just give you a second to think about that because there are some implications to it. And in reality, I've already given you the answer to that in the description when you signed up. So the answer is that this is false. All people are creative. And Albert Einstein, I think one of the great geniuses ever, says everybody is a genius. But the trick, as he says, is if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid, right? So if we work in environments where only a certain kind of creativity is valued or only certain kind of decision making is valued, then we may always feel like we're not creative. And maybe even right now you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, that's fine for a genius, but how in the world am I supposed to be able to contribute something creative? I'm in a role that does a job, and that's basically the spectrum of what my capacity is. But I will challenge you today, going forward, to think differently about what you do and what you have to offer, because in reality, everybody is creative and everybody has the capacity to do things differently, to adapt and change, and to improve the overall operation on their campus. So take this, obviously you believe that a little bit, or you perhaps wouldn't have dialed in today, but take this opportunity to congratulate yourself for the genius that you have to offer. And hopefully I'll give you a few ideas of ways that you might be able to leverage and cultivate that genius in new and different ways. So it helps a little bit to think about creativity and innovation in a broader context, because if you've ever tried to kind of search for definitions of creativity, you'll find that there are many, and the same is true for innovation. In the literature, it is extremely ill-defined, and sometimes creativity and innovation are used interchangeably, only adding to the confusion. So I'm offering a couple of kind of standards for the purposes of this conversation today, in which we're talking about creativity as the process of generating original ideas. So not necessarily individual ideas, right? The process could be a collective process, but the idea is that it is creating new, original thoughts and ideas that are aimed towards this intended purpose. And that purpose could be a problem that you're solving, or a program that you're developing, or opportunities for students, lots of ways that you can think about the intended purpose. Innovation is actually making those creative ideas into something that makes a difference. So exploiting those creative ideas in an intentional way is what innovation is. Another way to think about it is creativity is the seed of innovation and remains important throughout the process. While having that original idea, that germination, and kind of support through the innovation process continues to require creativity. That nugget is just the start. And in order to take it to fruition, to really see it grow and prosper, you have to continue probably to leverage lots of different creative solutions. So that's all just kind of background to get us started thinking about creativity and kind of what exactly we're talking about here. So many people lean towards creativity and think on the arts side of thing, which is obviously a very important and very tangible side of creativity. But in reality, all of us have the opportunity to just tweak the things that we already do in a new and interesting way and demonstrate our creativity. So the premise is creativity can be developed. Even if you're not somebody who naturally goes to the new idea, if you're not naturally somebody who is willing or able to step outside of your comfort zone in kind of a first instinct kind of way, that's okay. But the trick is to not accept that as the only way. The trick is, in order to develop and leverage your creativity, you have to practice it. So recognizing that you yourself can become more creative and that your team can also become more creative is a good first step. But also accepting that it is not something that you're just going to turn a switch and see a major difference, like wave a magic wand and suddenly, boom, everybody around you is going to be creative. It's not going to happen. You have to practice. You have to be willing to try some new things, to think some different ways, and as a result of that, you'll see that it becomes easier and easier as you go along. It is not going to be an epiphany right out of the gate, but if you are a leader, sometimes just changing a few things in your environment and in terms of the expectations of your environment, you may be able to create a culture in which the people around you are creative, and ultimately you all win as a result, even if it's not necessarily something that you yourself pursue on a hearty and dedicated way, although we'll talk a little bit about the benefit of the leader being engaged. It is fair to say, and I don't underestimate or kind of try and hide the fact that people do not like to change. That goes for our leaders as well as those who work for us and with us. So expecting pushback is something that is natural and normal, and you should not freak out when people say no or think that you're being a little bit crazy. That's okay. Expect that and have some answers at the ready so that you're ready to give some good explanation about why you're trying some new things and doing things in a different way. And ultimately, my suggestion is to be persistent. You are going to have some setbacks, you're going to make some mistakes, you're going to maybe ruffle some feathers, and it's worth it to continue and to push through and continue to try and practice, because I promise it does become easier and better the more often and better that you are leveraging your creative juices. So here's a few ideas, just a few suggestions on ways that you can individually and sometimes collectively cultivate creativity. The first is maybe a little bit intuitive, but in some environments this is not common, to discuss things that people care about outside of the work environment. Not everybody needs to be friends, but it is helpful to kind of cultivate people's creativity when you kind of encourage and understand the other things that they're good at, that they're interested in, and it often creates bridges for other opportunities. So don't stick to just business in your meetings. Have time where you're able to connect with each other and really encourage that among your team. Again, they don't have to be best friends, but it is helpful and often beneficial for people to get along with each other and to find those common connections. Feeding your team's mind and not just gem food is a great way to cultivate creativity. Not just doing in-services and webinars that are going to be focused on specific problems, challenges you're facing, or programs you're working on. There's lots of opportunities. This is probably one of the most wonderful things about working in a higher education environment, is that there is a million things that you can learn and a million experts on your campus, right? So take advantage of the fact that you can feed your team's mind from lots of different angles and create opportunities for them to think differently and to start building some bridges between different ideas. So it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly work related. A lot of times learning something about something else is going to then pay some dividends in the workplace. There's a mountain of research about the benefits of music to cultivating creativity. So if your people are individually listening to music, that's a great thing. Some people learn and work best in environments where music is playing, so encourage that if that's something that helps people along in their process. More and more you see people sitting with their earbuds in as they're working along, but if that's something that maybe was frowned upon in your environment, it may be something you'd like to revisit. It may also be something maybe you play some music before or during some of your meetings in order to create a different kind of ambiance and a different kind of mood among your folks. Natural elements, there's a ton of research that says that plants, for example, are a great source of creativity and well-being for people. So if there isn't a lot of that in your office space, that's an easy, relatively inexpensive way that you can create some opportunities for people to both feel better and to start to think better. I think the number that I read was about 15% improvement in creativity as a result of having natural elements around you. That could also mean going somewhere and taking advantage of natural elements, maybe having meetings outside or going on a picnic together and using your meeting time for that. Same idea, changes of scenery, just getting out of your regular office space and having new things around you. So take advantage of the beautiful campuses that many of us enjoy. Find other offices, other meeting rooms that you can use outside of your building. Maybe a little inconvenient from a time perspective, but it's probably worth the 5 extra minutes to be able to have a different space. Another change of scenery you might consider is to move people around, to get them out of their seats and to have them sit in different places. I've heard of places that change offices on a more than regular basis. There's certainly companies where there's no assigned seats and you work wherever you land. So you could play around with some of those ideas and maybe have people swap offices for a week or two. It might also help encourage some people to do a little housekeeping. Nothing wrong with that, right? Regular ideation. So brainstorming is a very common way for us to address challenges and problems, but you can ideate on lots of different subjects, not necessarily just problems that you're trying to solve. So taking advantage of the collective brain power on a regular basis gives people practice, and a well-facilitated problem solving can create a foundation so that the rest of your folks are able to kind of get in the habit of coming up with new ideas. So it's not just for solving problems necessarily.
Hey, Jeremiah, we have a question.
Yes. Go ahead.
What are some examples of how you might facilitate a session to enable your group to use regular ideation?
Sure, yeah. So a good example, let's say, from an area of GEM that maybe doesn't get a ton of face time might be scholarships. So maybe there isn't any problem with the awards process that you have right now, but maybe you just whiteboard it where you say, okay, if we could do anything that we wanted with our financial aid process or with our scholarship award process, what would we do? What would be kind of the best case, best idea solution? And pick the brains of the folks around the table. Whether or not they interact with that on a regular basis, many people have had personal experience in the area. They can imagine from a relationship or a customer service perspective what they would like to experience. And so it may be a matter of thinking about criteria and what other kinds of things we might value besides the standard test score and GPA. So just get out of the here's the problem that we're facing and let's look to solve it, just to kind of whiteboard and rethink a little bit some of the regular things that we do on a regular basis. Good question, thank you. It helps sometimes for many people to get out of the higher ed bubble, and one way to do that might be to look for best practices outside of higher education, outside of our campus, outside of other people's campuses, and take advantage of some of the benefits that nonprofits, that corporations have seen in their efforts to maybe solve a similar type of problem. So marketing, for example, is obviously a corporate-driven endeavor. You've got a lot of marketing faculty talent on your campus if you have a business school. Maybe having a conversation with your team and a faculty member from the department to think differently, or take advantage of some alums that have been out in the world for a couple of years and have them come back and share their experiences with your team. The idea is to start thinking about things in a different way and not just assume that, well, if these 3 schools do it this way, that's got to be the only way. You can ask lots of different people for suggestions. Again, outside of your regular bubble, you can poll prospective students. You can have sit-down conversations with current students. I had a really interesting conversation with an undergraduate admissions office several years ago, and they had no idea that some of the things that they were doing as part of their processes were driving their students crazy, until they took a pause and just stopped and asked a few simple questions about what their experience was like coming through the admissions process. So if you don't have the opportunity to do that on a regular basis, you may try and infuse a little bit of that along the way, just to give yourself the opportunity to take a step back and to get some input from some of your stakeholders. Try to prototype new ideas. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment, but the idea that you can try some different things on before you roll it out to the masses is a really smart way to go. So if you can bounce them off of current students or students that you have working in your office, even to bounce them off of other colleagues to see if this tweak that you've made to your process, do they see any kind of ways that it might go awry or any other benefits that they see. So there's lots of ways where you can take an idea and try it out on people before you actually roll it out to a larger group. And then lastly, accept that every aspect of every job and every service that we offer can be done differently and better, right? If you assume that your processes and the work that's being done is perfect as it is, then there isn't a lot of opportunity to be creative. So again, you can revisit any aspect of anything that you do and make it better. And that's an opportunity for all of us, from the admin all the way up to the senior vice president, all the way up to the chancellor or president of the university. So know that there are a million different ways that things can be done, and a lot of times they're all right? It's just a matter of finding the one that fits the best, or if there's an opportunity to make some small change, you may see a huge improvement, and you may not even care one way or the other about how it's done, but if your customer cares, that may matter a lot. Just a quick note about leadership and how leaders really significantly impact that experience for their workers. It's a huge opportunity, if you are the leader, to be able to draw out the creativity of your people. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you might think about doing that in just a moment. But the research says, in most circumstances, if people work together, that their diversity benefits the overall outcome of the product. And the reason for that is relatively well researched and clear, that most people are not going to produce as good a product as when multiple people are involved, right? So part of the leadership experience is acknowledging that failure is built in, that perfection is not something that you can expect when people are trying new things every single time. And I have found, especially in higher education, that this is not intuitive, that people are afraid to try new things because if it isn't correct, there is pretty hard repercussions as a result of it. And as a leader, one of your number one jobs is to make it okay to make mistakes when they're making calculated risks or when they're trying new things, right? So this was true when Thomas Edison said it, and it's true in every other instance. When something doesn't go right the first time, you just eliminated something that doesn't work and you can move on to the next opportunity. So you can try something different. And as a leader, that's really foundational. So ways that you can cultivate that creative culture, just a few suggestions. Again, nothing particularly earth-shattering here, but some opportunities for you to pause and take a step back and think about what you're doing now and how you might do a few things differently. The first is, I mentioned earlier, not every leader is necessarily comfortable being creative. Many of us are leaders because we get the job done and not necessarily because we're the most creative people. But it is an opportunity for you to model the way and to be open and honest about the fact that it's not comfortable and that it's not easy, but that you're willing to do it anyway, and that your hope and expectation is that your folks will follow. Encourage a team mentality. Again, this is a group process, and when you are trying to develop something new or different, having as many minds involved as possible. And so again, to the degree that you can encourage people to really connect with each other and to leverage those relationships and the diversity among your team, the better you're going to be off overall. Being open, both in terms of feedback that you're going to receive, but also just to the idea that people are going to do things in different ways and maybe not the way that you would necessarily have picked, is a good step to practice that openness and to be willing to see some different things, as long as the end user is satisfied. There's no harm. Consider non-public ways to make suggestions. Not everybody is comfortable making an open suggestion in a public forum, and so having some opportunities for ways for people to make suggestions in alternative ways is often helpful. Sometimes anonymous is great. Good ideas can come from any direction, doesn't matter who it came from. Asking questions, being somebody who is open to being asked questions, but also being the one to poke holes, to see things from different angles, to really demonstrate that. And if you are not somebody who is able to switch hats and to think of things from 4 different directions, having people in your mind from whom's voice you can pull when you're asking those questions is sometimes helpful. So, some people imagine 3 or 4 different prototypes of people. Maybe it's well, we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about the whole brain. If there's somebody who's really analytical on your team, then they may come from that angle naturally. But if you don't have somebody who asks questions from that angle, you may be the one that needs to ask those questions and to think of things from that direction. So just making sure that if it's not you, that you've got that imaginary person sitting at the table who's going to be able to ask those questions.
Jeremiah, we have a comment and a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Um, there's research in recent years suggesting that creativity may thrive best exercised in isolation as individual thinking. What contextual clues might hint at when individual rather than group activity is what will move a creative process along?
Oh, that's a really kind of well-formed question. So absolutely true. It's not fair to expect that in every circumstance, in every way, that the problem that you're trying to solve or the opportunity that you're trying to move forward is going to be moved best by a group dynamic. So you, as the leader in particular, but even as a voice at the table, um, I think listening for those clues that reference the idea that we've reached a wall and people are seeming frustrated or stressed is a good point to stop and maybe take some individual time. It may also be something that you build in on the front end. I've had a lot of really good success with people having some time and a question to think about on the front end, and then kind of pooling those ideas together so that people are able to take advantage of that individual time first before the group effort. But you do definitely, I think it's a wonderful question because the context will tell you for sure if you're hitting a wall and that it's time to take some time apart and to think about maybe and reflect on some of the comments that have happened in a group setting that may spawn a whole different line of individual thinking as a result of it. So in terms of other things that you can do as the leader, rewarding creative efforts is a significant thing that you can do, recognizing individual contributions and celebrating group contributions for creative efforts, even if you haven't necessarily even found the end result. Celebrating the fact that you're making progress is a good thing. You as the leader have an opportunity to ensure that you have diversity and inclusion of thoughts and ideas from lots of different kinds of people with lots of different backgrounds. So to the degree that you can influence the makeup of your team to ensure that you've got that great mix of thinkers, all the better. Make sure that you've built fun in. There's lots of research that shows that people, when they like coming to work, when they are engaged and happy, that they are more likely to be creative problem solvers. So promote fun among your team. Not that I'm sure, I mean, as far as I know, every GEM professional is super fun. So make sure that you're taking advantage of your individual fun and making some group fun out of it as well. And also, if there's a way for you in your budgeting process to put some funds aside so that you can keep some new ideas in cultivation all the time, all the better. So it's not something that is necessarily going to require, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, several $100s just for people to be able to try some things, to make some mistakes and know that that money was well spent because it's moving the ball forward, not just necessarily on a specific problem, but on a collective expectation and sense of support that new ideas are valued and appreciated. It's all great ways to attack that. So I did want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about whole brain thinking and design thinking as two ways, again, for you to just think a little bit differently when you're trying to solve some problems. I'm not saying that these are necessarily the ways, but they do provide a little bit of kind of insight in terms of how you might approach solving a problem or addressing an opportunity in different ways. So whole brain thinking is, again, one approach. I love the fact that this was built by a physicist who was just intrigued by how people can be both clever and dumb at the same time. And we've all experienced that, where we've got the extraordinary genius who's not able to carry on a reasonable conversation, people who are brilliant socially but just cannot get anything done, this kind of balance of different sets of skills. Ned Herman framed as this idea of whole brain thinking. So the big idea is that you are aware of your own thinking preferences, those of the people around you, and that you're able to get outside of your own preferred way and take advantage of all of the ways that people think. So the hope is that when you're able to employ this methodology, that you're able to think differently and get a better result get a better result because you're able to leverage the full spectrum of thinking. So here's what the model kind of looks like. And this would be, for me, a way to put some imaginary people around the table if you don't have somebody on your team who is naturally going to be asking questions from these different frames. But you could see from a problem-solving perspective that there are ways that you're able to use these even when you're just kind of thinking through different outcomes that you may face as a result of a certain problem or opportunity. So the four kind of quadrants, the analytical, the experimental, the practical, and the rational, and how each of those is broken down you can see in front of you. So an analytical person is more logical, more fact-based. The experimental person is going to be more holistic, and the rational person, relational person is going to be thinking more about the people and the emotional side of things, as the practical is going to be thinking more about the process and the plan and the details. So you can see how those kind of play together. And again, just one way for you to think about problems in a different way by thinking in a different way. Design thinking is another very popular framework, and this methodology has actually been in the news quite a bit recently as a way that many institutions are trying to approach their challenges or opportunities in a different way. So it is not something that is problem focused. Instead, it's more focused on the solution itself. And basically what you're doing is integrating logic and imagination and intuition to think about what could be, to explore the possibilities, and to find that kind of desired outcome that's going to be of greatest benefit to your end user, your customer. Tim Brown of IDEO is kind of one of the famous proponents, and obviously their company is very famous for the design thinking process. And you can see his quote here saying, design thinking can be described as the discipline that uses the designer's sensibilities and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and what is viable business strategy. So the idea is you're trying to get to customer value and market opportunity when you're looking to address that kind of ideal end result. What could be? Here's another way that he talks about it. I just happen to love the personality in this picture. But as a style of thinking, design thinking is generally how you're able to combine kind of empathy and creativity and rationality to find the right solution for a given context. So again, it's not a problem. It's really more about an ideal solution. And this is what it looks like. Design thinking is really kind of a 5-stage process where you're going from empathize to define, ideate, prototype, and test. You'll notice that, I know we're getting towards the end here, so I won't belabor too much, but I do like to point out that the process starts with empathize, which is an emotional, relational way of understanding the challenges that your customer or student are facing, right? So it doesn't say research, it doesn't say problem solve, it says empathize. So at the very root of what we're talking about here is getting a deep understanding of what it is we're trying to get to and the customer that we're trying to address, and to put together the best series of options that we can come up with in order to get to that ideal end result. My hope is that I'm going to do an interactive session on an introduction to design thinking as part of the conference, so fingers crossed that my proposal gets accepted. Go ahead.
Here's a comment and kind of a question. Is design thinking similar to what used to be known as system thinking and popular research on the learning organization?
So, well, I would say that there are elements.
Example, The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge.
Yes, one of my favorites. So there are elements of systems thinking in design thinking, but it is a little bit more of a process. When I think about systems thinking, it's really more about understanding how each aspect of something that you change can influence the larger whole. So to not just when you're kind of thinking in a systemic way, you're getting out of the immediate surrounding kind of aspects of what you're doing and looking at the ripple effects that come as a result of the fact that you're working in a system and not as a single department or as a single program. So in a way that's kind of folded in to the design thinking process, in a sense that you're certainly trying to understand a bigger picture and to understand the relationships among the different stakeholders that you're trying to work with. But the heart of this, I think, is really more about the kind of developing solutions, testing those solutions. So not quite the same. Yes. All right, last thing, and then we'll wrap up for today. This is a model that I did not develop. This is from Creativity at Work, publicly available on the web. But what it does that I thought I would just offer as, again, one solution, one framework that you might consider as you think about how you might approach creativity and innovation in a different way. This is from Creativity at Work. And so it infuses much of the thinking of design thinking and of whole brain thinking into the process. So what you've got here is kind of 8 steps, starting with discovery and moving through taking a problem and thinking of it more from an opportunity perspective, looking for the patterns and connections between them. So there's your systems thinking in a way. I love the fact that they point out that you should question your assumptions and not assume that because things are as they are, that they must be that way. For many of us, that might free us up and give us the opportunity to come up with a completely different solution if we don't take somebody's no as a hard and fast, or maybe somebody's rule as something that isn't negotiable. So understanding kind of what your context is and to think as freely as you can so that you're able to get to as many potential solutions as possible. I do like that they talk about incubating a little bit, infusing in that person's question about stepping back, and to be able to think about things on an individual basis is very helpful. So if you've been able to think and work as a group, to be able to step back and everybody collectively, individually think and sleep on it, I like that idea as well. Again, the ideate process to come up with experiments and prototypes, and to test them out on your population to see how they take. Imagine if before new programs were launched, I've worked on campuses where this was not true, so I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek. Imagine where before a new program was launched, there was an extensive research process where you needed to be able to quantify the demand and to understand the aspects that are going to be most important for a given prospective population. Wow, imagine, because it could just mean the matter of renaming a few of these awkwardly worded courses and giving them something that means a little bit more to the audience, that suddenly a program makes a lot more sense to a whole nother group of people. Who knows?
Here's a comment and a question.
Sure.
If being creative, while necessary, isn't valued on your campus unless there is a guaranteed positive result, what strategies do you have to open up higher administration, upper administration minds to supporting this?
Well, it's a great question, and I've lived in that environment before. It's a very hard one to be creative in. The answer, in some ways, depends on whether or not your leadership is going to be receptive to any argument, right? Because in some ways, there's a mountain of research that you can rely upon to make your case for why you should try XYZ thing, or how failure needs to be built into the system. I mean, there's just a mountain of research. So it's really, from an intellectual standpoint, kind of undeniable. But when budgets are tight and people scrutinize every dollar that's being spent, the idea that you might even just spend a couple of $100s to do something that may not be successful feels like a quote unquote waste. So every opportunity, every chance that you get to reinforce that it was beneficial and that the learning that came from it was this, so that you're not framing it as a failure and you're not highlighting the fact that the outcome wasn't successful, but more reframing it as a learning and growth process, the better off you're going to be. Again, not easy to do. Not every campus is going to appreciate and value it, but you, on an individual department basis, can create a little bubble where people don't need to know that you're allowing for failure, yikes, that you can start small and create in your own environment that kind of insulates people and gives them a sense of safety and security, even if outside of the walls of your office or your program, it's not going to be understood and valued in the same way. So be creative in the ways that you think about your context, and don't feel limited just because you feel like you have an eyeball on you. There's lots of ways to kind of dance around that. I don't want to yammer on too much more. I want to give you a couple of more minutes before we reach the end of the hour to ask any other questions that might be helpful to you.
Or any comments?
Or any comments. We'll take anything you've got. Well, as you're typing those ideas in, I do want to just take this moment to thank you for taking the hour and spending it with us so that we can just get your creative juices flowing a little bit and get you thinking a little bit more about creativity overall and innovation in the long term. Ultimately, what our hope is that if you're able to take and develop that individual germ of creativity and get that process going, that innovation will follow. It is a tricky business that we work in where for hundreds and hundreds of years, things have always been done the same way. And the opportunity for faculty who the very nature of their job is to create new knowledge. The fact that that's the foundation of what we do should create opportunity for us to be creative in other ways in our jobs. And as we've heard from that previous question, that is not always the case. So if we can start by just creating an environment where people can be creative and try new and different things, that we may collectively as a whole be able to take higher education, graduate education, and move it forward and elevate the experience of our students, elevate the experience of our peers, and make our collective graduate education environment a better place to be. So if there aren't more questions, I'm just entirely grateful for you all taking your interest and investing your time in learning a little bit more.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I don't see any more questions today. I just want to let everybody know again to also thank you for participating in the webinar today. Shortly, webinar participants will receive an email from NAGAP, which includes a link to an evaluation. So please take a few minutes to provide some feedback for us today. The webinar is recorded, so we will be posting it on the NAGAP YouTube channel in the near future. And we hope you'll join us for some of our upcoming webinars over the next few months. We'll send out notifications about these as they become available. And a little bit of a reminder, we hope to see you at our annual conference, which is, again, focused on sustaining and innovation from strong foundations to creative solutions. We've extended the deadline for proposal submission till October 2nd, and that's on our website. The annual conference this year is going to be in New Orleans, and it's scheduled for April 11th through the 14th. So just a little plug there for the opportunity for you guys to submit a proposal and share your knowledge at the annual conference. So before I sign off, I just want to say thank you very much to Jeremiah for this session today, and everybody have a great fall term.